Yeah, move on to the symmetry over here. Um, and this will be something that I'll begin to integrate in the Chiron teachings. It was originally actually for the Chiron teachings, which I haven't done yet, but I will be doing soon, because to me, this imagery over here, you can sit with and really just contemplate for hours, and it just speaks to the volume of everything that is human, in my opinion, and the nature of our existence here. So let me go and sort of like inspire you a little bit about what I mean. So, I mean, if this doesn't speak to Pluto, then I don't know what does. This area over here, it is the core of what is held at the most deepest level. Okay, the deepest level of something that is essentially emotionally frozen. And Pluto is fascinating to me because on one level, from evolutionary astrology's perspective, it's the soul's deepest desires, and it reflects the nature of unresolved emotional material that clearly comes with us, that is the root of our existence or our choices in lives. And yes, that's true. But there is also a part of Pluto that, in a sense, is attached to the unresolved desires. But that is also where the deepest core emotional experiences that are frozen within the psyche, that are essentially within ourselves, where the deepest disempowerment is. And when I talk about the deepest disempowerment, I mean those moments where the experience of and the intensity was so intense, was so traumatic in that way, that whatever it was is captured in that frozen capsule of deeply unprocessed and unresolved emotional material. Like it needs to be unwrapped. And to me, when I look at the astrology, there are, to me, Pluto is not just the nature of desire. It is the nature of desire on one level. It is the deepest wound that the soul carries on another level. It is also like Rudar talks about, the essence of something that has, previous to this life, been in full bloom. It is the part of you at the deeper self that is already in existence of pure life, right? So we recognize that Pluto is where the cycle of growth and flourishment and deep life is moving through. But it also points, and for most of you that have gone through your Pluto square and you've had Pluto experiences, will acknowledge this and recognize this, that it is also where the process, and this is where the resolving desires or separating desires from EA could talk about, where something that in this lifetime has life, that over the nature of your unfolding awakening experience, in other words, over your life as you go through your Pluto square, or is certain intense transits that are creating that alchemical process where the soul has clearly said, hey, by the way, I'm going in this direction. And at that point in your life, we're going to go through that crisis. And that crisis is going to lead to certain dynamics that I've already asked you to do. And so little ego self, you're going to deal with that at the age of 36, right? And Pluto points to this area that once was flowered that now needs to die. So at the deepest level, it is reflecting to us what is going to die, what is going to essentially die as a natural cycle of life, and that the natural cycle of life and that energetic impulse is going to no longer exist, and that in his imagery, it goes back to the ground. So classic astrology, we go read in our books, Pluto's regeneration, right? Yeah, cool. Regeneration because of the nature of something that is essentially dying and is going back into the soil to then be cultivated and nourished and absorbed up so that it then can rise with an entirely new life stream. And so we go through this alchemical mutation, the dark night of the soul, as it were. And it is the reflection of the deeper self. It is the reflection of the core experiences that are locked away in the most frozen parts of ourselves, that want to be thawed out, that want to be, through this incarnation, it wants to come through the Uranian field. So the Uranian field in this expression over here is the first point of contact that the personality self, which is the conscious awareness, like we can see this, this land that sits on the top over here. It's the structure self. It's the formation, okay? It's the formation of the self. It's here, we can visible, we can see it. But what we're not seeing at the top there is this Plutonian realm, which I'll get into in terms of storytelling. But here we have this Uranian realm. It is the first point of contact from the Saturnian realm into the Uranian realm, okay? And what the Uranian realm is really pointing to us through the discovery of Uranus was through a telescope, that we're looking deeper. We need to accelerate, and as we accelerate, we look deeper. We look deeper into something. And it is that point of reference that is pointing to something deeper. So Uranian experiences, from what I've seen and observed, and this is why, in my opinion, and I'm sure some other astrologers feel the same way, that the nature of Uranus will reflect the trauma signature in a chart, because it is where imprinting from this deeper Plutonian self that wants to come to the surface to resolve the frozenness of emotional trauma or experiences, it wants to thaw it out. It wants to break through, and it wants to come from the deep self into this emerging self, yeah, to be fully integrated again, right? To remember. And Uranus points to where that individuation begins. And so when we open up to that Uranian field, immediately we are interfacing with the boundaries of Saturn. And Saturn, within this construct, its responsibility, its role is to keep things safe. And so when something comes from the deep self into the Saturnian realm, so to be more practical about this, if you sit with your life right now and everything's cool and it's happening, and then all of a sudden Mercury, again in this particular example, comes across and it squares your Uranus, and somebody comes into your life and gives you a piece of information that just triggers you, right? And you're sitting with this awareness now that's just come into your field, and you can't grab it. You can't grab the trigger. You can't grab the words. You can't grab the awareness. You can't grab the feeling. But you've clearly been triggered because there is something within this deeper self that vibration has brought. Uranian contact has brought you something to process that is really pointing to a part of yourself that wants to be reawoken. And the reason why it's trauma in that sense is because in that immediate moment, in that Saturnian realm, we're applying the judgments, we're applying the defense mechanisms, we're applying the inability to understand what it's really about. And so in that moment, we can't really process the depth of what's actually occurring. So it has to happen over time, which is the thing that I want to share with you in this message, the summary, the point is, when you're dealing with the Uranian transit, or when you're dealing with planets making contact Uranus with clients and within your own life, it's really important to give yourself the space to know that in that moment, or in those moments, or in that week, that whatever is emerging from the Uranian field into your conscious awakening self, i.e. Carl Jung saying that, you know, we're trying to bring our subconscious into the conscious mind. It wants to awaken. He's referring to this point of reference between Uranus and Saturn. And of course, the moon, which is this ego sense of self, and wherever you've got your moon in your chart will dictate how we're actually able to emotionally begin integrating and digesting the experience. Those two components operate through time. Saturn and the moon are time restricted. And so it is deeply important to realize that Neptunian or Uranian awakenings that are pointing to the Plutonian Neptunian field need time and digestion, and in exploration and contemplation of the meaning of that. So self-awareness actually begins to arise. And so in this process of the self-awakening dynamic, we actually get the opportunity to transform. We get the opportunity to rewrite the storyline that may exist within our deeper memory fields that are existing within ourselves. And so Uranus, obviously in this case, Sorry, I don't mean to say obviously, because it's not obvious, but Uranus in this case will speak to the immediate relationship between a memory that happened in time, Saturn, and something that cannot be processed at that, so then eventually becomes an individual memory within the soul that then eventually over time will become, if unable to be processed, will become a layer of the deeper, as you can see here, you can see the color changing in this process, how it becomes more darker. The density of the emotional process becomes denser, and you can feel Pluto here in this process. So it becomes denser and it gets pushed down until it eventually, from a endocrine system perspective, the nature of the way that the body feels with Plutonian things is it just disassociates. So you notice how with a lot of people that experience a trauma, and then sugar and foods that essentially act as a very, very subtle dopamine release, or in this case, a need to really soothe the deeper emotions that are arising. Because of course, when Uranian experience emerges to the surface, it's not something subtle, it's big emotions. And it's that interface between these two. So when you're looking at the outer planets in the astrology charts, and you're looking at the Saturn moon structure, and you're looking at the human being, this is what you're seeing. You're seeing this here. And then you're looking at the charts, and you're trying to use the astrology to, in a sense, fuse a connection between these outer planets and their intention, and what the personal planets are essentially trying to support the deeper planet, the Uranian Plutonian field in that way. So the personal planets pointing to how the ego structure can facilitate and support the deeper awakening of the self, in the sense. And you can see the Neptunian field here. It's the totality, it's the water, it's the consciousness, it's everything. Okay, so I'm just going to take a juice over here. I want to talk about an experience, just to kind of give something more imagery based. So when you look at this this community, this city, so within the city, you can see the Saturnian boundaries, right? The formation of brick structures and housing. And within the structure, you can see the moon. This community, this city has a society. It has a belief system. It has a set of values, Venus. It has a mercurial function, as in their roads and how they've set up their postal service, and the chatter that exists between the neighbors. And, this person was working over here and now he's working over there, and the gossip that happens within a mercurial function. And the Mars function of, how they've set up their emergency services, and what their townsfolk have decided to put in place to raise structures, and, how they actually go about executing the enforcement of their Saturnian structure, and how that sense of identity is linked with it. And within this community, as a whole community, as a holistic community, there are people existing within it that are connected with the consciousness of the structure, right? So you can see within a human being, they have their constitution, they have their imagery, they have their mercurial function, and so on. But let's go into the Uranian and Pluto and Neptunian field here, okay? And now let's take an example, right? Uranus begins to, so this city has a birth chart, right? And all of a sudden, the north and south node makes a connection to Uranus, right? A square. And while the nodes were having a square to Uranus, Mars, also in the sign of Aries, was making a square as well, or an inconjunct. And in some random way, a fire broke out, okay? And a fire broke out, and in this part of the city, and 5 people died, okay? Now what you have here is a situation in which an experience through planetary configurations, and again, these planetary configurations have zero interest in human activity. They're not sitting there with their personalities going, or at least from my opinion, they're not sitting there going, okay, now we're going to cause this, we're going to cause that. It is simply just the nature of the solar system we have, and the nature of how things operate. And so this is what emerges into the conscious self. So there's a fire that breaks out and 5 people die. Let me break this open into the depth of what we're really dealing with here. Clearly, this community now is facing a Plutonian thing because there's loss, right? There's deep loss that has taken place. You've got people that have got family members that have lost family members. So you have a trauma. You have Uranian experience in which the context of the situation is so incredibly large that the Saturnian structure of that person trying to process that they've just lost somebody in a day is not going to happen. They have to go through the cycles of grief. They have to go through the cycle of acceptance, the anger, and so on and so forth. And so what happens in this natural case with the loss is that this city, this community, then has an imprint within its memory field, Uranus, that becomes something that exists within the Uranian field of this city, okay? That now, 7 years later, okay, or let's say 9 years later, because we're dealing with the nodal opposition, right? So the nodes reach an opposition to the point where this thing happened 9 years later. And what happens is a certain kind of situation, like not necessarily the same situation, but let's say they set up a memorial, okay? They want to process through their grief, Neptune. They want to, as a city, kind of like come together and find ways to use that as a healing potential to reunite the community, because obviously there's a lot of fear. Obviously there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of anxiety in this event because it's traumatic and it's existing within their memory field. And 9 years later, there's another incident that takes place and it reawakens this traumatic experience that happened 9 years earlier. And so here we get to see that the Uranian field comes through back into the consciousness of the society, and it becomes the communication, right? People are talking about, people are going to the city center and saying, we need to put more fire hydrants in. We need to train more people to do this. We need to deal with this. And it's all coming from this memory field that's existing within the Uranian structure. And what I wanted to actually maybe add to this, just to give it more context, let's say Pluto in this situation makes a trine to the nodes. Okay, so 9 years later, the nodes return, so they have a nodal reversal, and at the exact same time, Pluto makes a trine to these nodes. So yeah, we have Plutonian energy coming through the conscious structure of how the society had embedded and experienced and digested this event, the fire and the loss of it. And 9 years later, as they hit the same critical point, Pluto trines it and it brings to the surface something. And during that process of Pluto trine, it comes to the surface, this city gets the opportunity to reprocess what was essentially buried under the surface over here. They get to realize that some people need to process through their grief. They need to process through their trauma. And this is how I see astrology. This is how I'm beginning to see the potential of what we hold within the soul memory. That you have Chiron in the second house, and the classic communication is blah, 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 blah. But really, we're limiting ourselves to the potential of what's really occurring there. And one of the beautiful things that we get to do is we get to have somebody show up in front of us and say, hey, here's my astrology chart. I've got Chiron in the second house. Can you help me understand my life? And you get the opportunity to, with this dynamic, ask the question, hey, I see that you've got Venus trining that at the moment, or Venus squaring that. Is there anything that's taking place around a certain, your definition, like you go in and you use that classic cookie cutter example of, okay, Chiron's in your second, Venus is squaring it right now. Did you have any events in your life right now that, traumatized you or felt that you had to reject your own value or belief? And they go, yeah, actually 2 days ago, I just had an argument with somebody where they told me that I was just pathetic. And it's in that moment that trigger brought us the opportunity to not only use astrology in this depth, but to give us the opportunity to say, hey, okay, cool. So we've got something to work with. We've identified the arena, the area, the astrology chart's done its job. Let's process more what's actually maybe wanting to come to the surface to be processed and reintegrated. And so as I talked about earlier with one of the people that I know the hours come up, Linda. So one of the people that I really like at the moment that is helping, or I believe is really, really helping human beings work through their trauma is this Dr. Swartz. And she writes, the neurobiology, in other words, certain techniques, EMDR, and other forms of neuroplasticity and stuff that are coming available to us at a collective level, are offering this neurobiology. So the neurobiology of trauma recovery helps us to learn how to move out of hopelessness. So in this case, with that person, this fire that took place, here's the wife that lost her husband, and it's like she lost everything. You know, she had Pluto square a moon, and she just lost a part of her died. And for 10 years, she just stayed with that hopelessness that she would never love again, as an example, right? And as a certain activation takes place, she comes to an astrologer and she rekindles a part of herself that has maybe been frozen from a past lifetime and where she lost that person. You know, we can begin to work with this right now, and we can move out of that hopelessness and increase the capacity, or in this case, increase your capacity to feel empowered and recognize that you are capable of living the life you want and deserve. And so in a very small way, it is the potential for us to really work with a deeper self that on some level has had traumatic experiences, but also positive things, where it has just simply been that somebody internalized the message from the parent, and now you get the opportunity to rewire that so they can step out into themselves, into their world, and really be authentic with themselves in a way that's always been there, but they've never allowed that at a Saturnian level because they've never trusted that, firstly, what they've knew in themselves to be, they shut it down because of a message, you know, that now you get to help them with because Pluto is trining their Mercury at the time, and they get to